Melissa Hathaway, welcome to Poland.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome here to Poland. This is my first time here.
You have joined us for the second edition of the European Cybersecurity Forum here in Kraków. What's your first impression, now that you've said it's your first time in Poland?
Oh, I think Krakow is a beautiful city. I've had the opportunity to go to the small Platz and the large Platz and the gates and see the castle, so I'm looking forward to spending 2 more days here.
You've served as cybersecurity expert under 2 administrations, presidential administrations of George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Looking at those 2 periods in the story of cybersecurity worldwide, how would you say the 2 roles differed in your particular experience?
Yeah, so the most thing that President Bush defined everything on a national security threat, and it was the priority came about because of the extent of intellectual property theft in the United States. And he said we really needed to have a program that addressed offense-informed defense, and we needed to ensure the security and resilience of the country. But when President Obama came in and I transitioned for President Obama, he wanted to define things in economic terms, and they could no longer be defined as the threat to the country. It had to be the opportunity to the country. And so we had to start to change the way that we were talking about cybersecurity on what are the economic losses that we're seeing because of our insecurity? Why do we need to have security resilience of these modernization initiatives that were instituted under President Obama?
You have also conducted impressive research with reference to the 2 periods we've just talked about, and you've co-authored Cyber Readiness Index 1.0 and recently Cyber Readiness Index 2.0. Can you tell us a little bit more about this research? What's the core substance of it?
So I created the Cyber Readiness Index. So I developed this methodology based on my experience with the 2 presidents and working with countries all through Europe, that there is not a balance between the economic agenda and the national security agenda. And for the last 7 or 8 years, because of the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, all of the capitals are discussing things in economic terms. So we have to change the way that we're thinking about and talking about cybersecurity. The Readiness Index does that.
To what extent is it on the legislative level and operational level? For instance, there is a lot of talk here at this conference and in general in the public domain about the NIS directive in Europe. How does it compare? Because the same problem seems to apply to Europe. There are countries which have a fragmented approach to cybersecurity solutions, and there are different standards in different countries. Europe, as always, is trying to standardize things, bring common perspective on things. How would you say that could be a problem? What are the biggest stumbling blocks in the process, potentially?
I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks is that many of our countries are developing strategies, but few of our countries are actually developing the operational aspects to execute the strategy, and even less of our countries are funding it. And so if you first have a strategy, and it's great to have something on paper, but you don't operationalize it, and even worse, you don't fund it, it's likely it's not going to get executed. So part of what I did with the Cyber Readiness Index is I created 7 main pillars that I look at whether or not countries have the policies in place, the operations in place, and then are funding for those operations. You can start to look at the maturity over time. And I think that each one of our countries is on a different maturity curve in different areas, whether it's from strategy or incident response or the legal frameworks.
Melissa, at this conference we talk about cybersecurity along 4 thematic streams, right? We talk about the state, the role of the state in cybersecurity and creating the right ecosystem. We talk about military, we talk about business, and finally, obviously, about the future. Now, if you look at the different stakeholders that play a part in strengthening cybersecurity of any given country, what would you say are the most important potential bottlenecks to address first? I mean, which stakeholders should start talking first and why?
Well, I think that the private sector designs, builds, deploys, and will actually operate all of our critical infrastructures. And so having a true understanding of what are the security imperatives of the state, and then how do you get the business sector to actually implement those is super important. And so I would start with business and government. there's currently still a misalignment between business and government in all of our countries.
Is there a perception issue as well? What I mean by that is that governments usually think that businesses are in a parasitic relationship with governments, in the sense they just want more money for more expensive cybersecurity. Because especially in the US, you get fancy statistics about how much a single incident at a corporate or public administration level costs, and these are million-dollar figures per incident.
Right.
So what would you say? Is there a potential problem in this relationship, in the trust level, and is there anything like that? Because it's
Absolutely.
a purely intuitive question.
I think so. I think it really depends on which country you're in. In the United States, we do not have a very good, strong, trusted relationship between industry and government, and I would say that trust relationship continues to break down as we have the United States government going after Microsoft and its data center in Ireland, or after Apple to put a backdoor in its encryption system. And so I think that the trust is breaking down. But in Europe, you have some countries here that still have quasi-national providers. The United Kingdom with British Telecom for telecommunications, Italy, Enel, and their big seven, kind of providers. So if you start to look at it, there's a different relationship. There's actually already a state and business entanglement, if you will, here in Europe. So there might be an easier path for Europe than there is in the United States for a private-public partnership.
Most people think that cybersecurity is exclusively about technical matters. This conference analyzes cybersecurity along 4 thematic streams, as we discussed earlier. Given your experience at conferences, but also as an expert, what would you say would be a good direction to take for a conference like CYBERSEC in years to come to further improve cooperation between stakeholders, critical stakeholders?
Well, I think that, if I were to look at next year, the following year of CyberSec and coming back, what will be important is to kind of start to say, we started a project, let's say this year, between this industry or with academia, and come back next year and report about the progress and the outcomes. I think that 2 or 3 years from now, it'd be really great to see the Visegrad 4 come back and say, we worked on these following things, and this is something that's very unique to Eastern Europe, and the things that we're going to work together on and how we solved it maybe as the V4. I think if you look at it also as how can the Czech Republic or here in Poland, as you might be able to implement the NIST directive first, what were the lessons learned that you could actually then share with the Netherlands or some other country? Incubate as small and then build to the large.
So, to decipher your diplomatic language, what it really means is that the less abstract path in saying, let's build a better world, better communication, better, let's define specific objectives within a specific time frame for a very specific group of countries and deliver those in a specified period of time. Is that what you're saying, Melissa?
I'm a very action-oriented person, and I like to see outcomes. I think it's interesting to have a conference and where we can all talk about the problem. I'd rather see a conference where we all talk about how we solve the problem.
Thank you very much.
That's
a good closing remark. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.